Since 1957, the OMEGA Railmaster has never seemed to get the appreciation that I think it deserves. So let's make up for some lost time. So to call a watch from a mainstream brand like Omega underrated is a stretch to say the least, but very few watches, or really any watch, has been confronted with the same type of situation that the OMEGA Railmaster has. With its original reference, the CK2914, being introduced alongside two legendary watches, the Omega Speedmaster CK2915 and the Omega Seamaster CK2913 in 1957. And as the Seamaster and Speedmaster have continued to ascend into icon status, and yes, I think the term icon is actually justified in this instance, unlike many scenarios where it's just thrown around very lightly, the Railmaster fell to the wayside, ceasing production just 6 years after its original introduction in 1957. And although the watch has not been completely forgotten as a result of watch enthusiasts' keen memories, in comparison to other notable models in Omega's catalog, it has failed to ever reach a level of appreciation that I feel it deserves. But in 2017, the Railmaster line got a significant breath of fresh air with the release of new models, a couple of them being the Omega Seamaster Railmaster, which I have reviewed on the channel before, being one of the more affordable options for those going for, say, a coaxial sports watch from the brand, and this 1957 Trilogy model, to honor 60 years since the original release of the CK2914, alongside the release of two other Trilogy models representing the Speedmaster and Seamaster collection, which were all released in a somewhat limited run of 3,557 pieces. But of this trio, surprisingly, the watch that stood out for me the most, the watch that I just gravitated to, was this Omega Railmaster. As there was just something about it that just intrigued me, both in its design and understanding that of the three, it would probably end up being glanced over by many mainstream consumers, giving us watch enthusiasts another watch to enjoy for ourselves. So this Railmaster has the reference of 220-103820-01002. Case size 38 millimeters, and actually when measuring it across, kind of closer to 37.5 millimeters. Case thickness 12.5 millimeters, lug to lug 47.8 millimeters, lug width 19 millimeters, water resistance of 60 meters, has a sapphire crystal, and for the movement, an automatic Omega coaxial caliber 8806. So when looking at this Trilogy model, there's clearly a lot of tribute to the past in its execution, but one area or a couple areas that it doesn't overly play into this vintage aesthetic that it has is in its case and its wearability. On the surface, the 38 millimeter case might seem rather small. However, the combination of the 47 millimeter lug to lug distance, we really do have a nice middle ground of appearing both vintage in its looks and case diameter, with a touch of modern in its wear across the wrist, which, considering this model is a modern watch created in order to pay homage to the original 1957 design, I think this does provide a happy medium for enticing those who generally lean towards purchasing new watches to dive into a piece of this nature. On the wrist, the Railmaster is a treat. It's relatively thin with its case, 12.5 millimeters, which will allow it to slide under some of the even the more thinner dress cuffs out there, wearing very similar to that of the Explorer 214-270, a watch that could also be thrown into the ring in terms of a watch that also is considered alongside this Railmaster Trilogy. The case and the bracelet feature different types of finishing, with the most prominent being polished throughout, giving the watch a highly reflective finish in the light, which is probably my biggest gripe with this design, as I think a brush case finish just throughout would be just more fitting for a piece that was intended to be an anti-magnetic tool watch. A case finish that the Omega Seamaster Railmaster incorporated within its interpretation of the design, and to me was one of the big draws towards that watch itself. Transitioning to the bracelet, we have polished outer links with the addition of a large brush center link, and then on the underside coming together at a locking clasp, showcasing a 2-button release system. The clasp, also in similar fashion to other sports models from the Omega range, features their own execution of on-the-fly bracelet adjustment, with a push-button slide system providing micro-adjustment without the need of any tools, and is one of my favorite executions of this type of optionality on the fly on the market. And overall, just to reiterate this common theme, the Railmaster sustains its underlying original intended purpose in the details, while offering a modern presence on the wrist that will make it appropriate for a wide variety of wearers and a real treat to glance down throughout the day. And one of my favorite things about vintage Omega, especially their sports models, is if you were just given the dial and were asked, what watch does this belong to, or what brand does this belong to, even without the logo, you probably would not have any trouble identifying just with that dial. And although the Railmaster may not have the same visual cues as other models within the Omega catalog, it still is undoubtedly Omega. Now, I've mentioned how this watch gives off primarily a vintage vibe, which is not felt until really looking through the sapphire crystal. First starting with the blackened dial surface that appears a true black at a glance, but upon closer inspection demonstrates there's much more to it, with it being more fit to classify as, say, a charcoal or a rich anthracite, and was certainly chosen as a way to play into the aged look of the Trilogy collection. At the 12, we have the printing of the old school Omega logo, and one of my favorite touches, the writing of Railmaster in neatly scripted cursive at the 6. Along the outside, the dial showcases the quarter numeral markings of 3, 6, 9, and 12 in white lettering, and the long white minute tracks that extend into the center substantially to almost the same degree as that of the long artificially aged hour markings. And because this watch is a tribute, I think this extreme use of fake patina sits better for me, but unlike other models that feature faux patina in Omega's catalog that commonly provide options that do not feature this artificially constructed aged look, this Omega Railmaster line doesn't offer much variety at all, which I think speaks to the underappreciated nature of this watch in general, which we'll get to in a moment. Towards the center of the dial, we have the familiar handset that we have seen time and time again from the brand, with the thin pointed second hand, the thicker pointed minute hand containing Superluminova, and the broad arrow hour hand that is essentially done for Omega what the Mercedes hand has done for Rolex. The broad arrow hand on this watch just works exceptionally, adding a level of sportiness to an otherwise pretty tame dial. And one other small final point here that you need to mention is within the sapphire crystal, you'll see a small little Omega logo. The logo seated right at the center of the crystal, right where the hands meet, is a small nod to the past and reminds me greatly of several vintage Omega timepieces that I've owned in the past, primarily my Omega Paipan constellation that contains this sign point at the center of the crystal. However, in this case, for this Railmaster, it is even more pronounced than that of its vintage counterparts, demonstrating the small details that make this watch what it is. Flipping the Omega Railmaster over, we have view of a closed caseback showing the hippocampus logo as a result of this model residing within the Seamaster collection. The signed caseback protects the popular caliber from the brand, the Omega Coaxial 8806. The movement operates at 25,200 vibrations per hour, is METAS certified, so a master chronometer here, has the accuracy criteria of 0 to plus 5 seconds a day, is resistant to 15,000 Gauss, and has a power reserve of 55 hours. And I really don't know what else I can say about Omega's coaxial master chronometers that I have not already said on the channel. I mean, they look the part. I mean, they're machine finished, but they're fantastic. Just the wave finishing on the rotor, the bridges, the perlage finishing underneath the balance. You got the silicone hairspring, as well as just the amount of criteria, or just the strenuous testing that comes with these 8 different steps to become a master chronometer. I definitely recommend, if you guys have not looked into what Omega did to create this master chronometer certification, it's really interesting, and I applaud them for doing it. In addition, you also get the boost of the coaxial escapement, improving in the basic lever escapement by separating the locking mechanism and the impulse to the balance to avoid sliding friction, which in turn is going to reduce the level of need for lubrication, and is going to reduce the amount of wear on the movement over time, extending that time between servicing. When looking at watches in recent and remote memory that didn't quite reach the expectations that they had and really flopped, looking at it in hindsight, it's not really hard to understand why they failed. With some of them targeting an unviable segment of the market, or just having a design that simply was not tasteful or daring to capture the hearts of consumers. But when it comes to the Railmaster, it is a line that has always puzzled me in how it wasn't able to break through as a household name. Sure, some of the blame could be put on rival offerings from brands like IWC or Rolex, or even 2 other sports models from Omega that have hogged the spotlight for the most part. And this Railmaster Trilogy to me serves as a breath of fresh air to a line that certainly needed it, but is a breath of fresh air that unfortunately slowly dissipates when factoring together that this is a somewhat limited production and the lack of variations within the Railmaster line in general that only lives through a small handful of SKUs in Omega's catalog. And as much as I think this watch is perhaps victim to a lack of consumer demand, especially given the other options in Omega's sports range, I ultimately believe that this watch has not been given the proper chance to succeed in quite a long time. And although I can't really guarantee it, I have a feeling that if the Railmaster was prioritized to succeed, that it could start to gain some ground in proving how cool of a watch it really is. So guys, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Also, I want to hear your comments about the Railmaster. Do you see the same upside as well as the same lack of appreciation that I see with this line? I've always just been a big fan of the Railmaster, the Ranchero, as well as, of course, the Constellation, which I think you guys probably know it if you've been watching for a long time. I know we hear about the Seamaster, the Speedmaster as being very beloved models from Omega, and I'm sure those are the big cash cows for them. But what do you think about these other lines that have maybe not been as prominent within Omega's catalog, especially this Railmaster again? I'd love to see comments down below. Also guys, if you're in the market for any watches or watch straps, hit the links in the description, go to teddybaldassarre.com, as well as Bob's Watches. Any purchase using those links helps support our show as well and what we're doing here. So guys, thank you again so much for watching, be well, and I will see you all very soon.